Welcome back. This is day 14 of testimony in the Casey Anthony trial. We are hearing about how Kaylee Anthony's remains were found. We heard the 911 call about little Kaylee's remains and also heard testimony from the deputy who went into the woods where Kaylee's remains were found. He was first on the scene there. We also heard more from Lee Anthony, Casey's brother. He said Casey told him that Zanny the nanny, the fictitious woman, held her down, says she was an unfit mother, and took her daughter, Kaylee. Criminal defense attorney Keith Murray joins us now from New York. And Keith, thanks so much for joining us first off. But let's say you're Jose Baez. You know the case. You know what's coming. Are you embracing lie after lie to support your defense? Are you thinking here, how am I going to get out of this one?
Well, I think we haven't seen any evidence of some kind of psychological testimony yet. There's been no indication so far from the pleadings and motions that they're going to put some type of evidence on. But these lies are so vivid and so detailed, I wouldn't be surprised if Casey Anthony passed a polygraph test. I mean, it really sounds like she believes what she is saying here.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I've spoken to many people about this case, and they say, why didn't Jose Baez plead some sort of insanity here? She obviously has some sort of psychological issue if she's lying this much about everything. Why didn't he? Was it a possibility?
I'm sure at some point it was a possibility. I mean, only the defense knows their strategy, and they're trying very hard to pin this on the father, as he said in his opening statement, which now he's got to pony up that evidence that he put out there in his opening statement that we're blaming it on the father for whatever reason. It could be Casey snapped and tried to cover for her father because she loves her father. She could have snapped because of losing her daughter. We're just going to have to wait and see in the next 3 weeks.
That was prosecutor Frank George questioning Lee Anthony this morning, and it's hard to follow this because you're thinking what is real and what is a lie. Let's go back to defense attorney Keith Murray. Keith, how big a part does Casey's brother play in the prosecution? Is he a huge key, a piece of the puzzle here?
Well, clearly she's explaining these vivid details to him as she's explained to a lot of her friends, as we heard the few opening days of testimony when the housemates in that apartment and all the people she partied with. I think at this point the defense can do one of three things. They can ignore it, which is not going to help them, but leave the jury guessing and not really explain what it was all about. They can put on a psychological expert and try to explain what was going on, but there's no indication that they're going to do that. The last thing they can do is put Casey Anthony on the stand herself to testify and explain this is, what I was lying about, or I truly believe these things. But then that opens her up to the state examining her, and she's going to be caught in all these lies, and it's going to be absolutely disastrous for the defense.
Speaking of disaster, yesterday was huge for the prosecution and the computer searches. Some of them were this: neck breaking, head injuries, internal bleeding, chest trauma, even ruptured spleen. Also, of course, chloroform, more than 80 times searched. How do you explain that, Keith? You can't ignore that. Do you have to imply that someone else may have used that computer? Do you think that's where they'll go?
That's exactly what the defense is going to try to do here. Basically, all the evidence in this case is circumstantial, and it right now points to anybody who has been in the house, been in the yard, been around the pool, and used that car, which could be Casey, her father, and her mother, possibly her brother. So there's nothing that directly points to Casey as yet that hard. So they're going to say it was the father or one of her friends. I know there was testimony about a friend of hers having that that romancer with chloroform picture up on his MySpace page. Right. Was he ever in the house? So they're going to try to diffuse it away from her, saying anybody who was in the house or near the computer could have done those searches. And
what people have to realize and remember, the defense doesn't have to prove anything. They only have to put reasonable doubt into the jury's mind, right?
That's right. It's the state's burden of proof. The defense cannot put on any case at all if they don't want to.
Just in case it is something, it may be nothing, but just in case.
That was the 911 call made on December 11th, 2008, the day that Kaylee's remains were found. They were found by a man named Roy Kronk, the so-called meter reader. Let's bring back defense attorney Keith Murray. Keith, it seems like the meter reader, Roy Kronk, is a huge part of the defense, and they're going to just go after this guy and say he was making money off of this, and that he moved the body several times.
Yeah, my understanding is that he originally tried to get police involved back in, I think, September, and tried to bring them to that site several times, and the police wouldn't go in because it was submerged and it was filled with snakes or something like that. And then finally, he hit pay dirt on December 11th, 2008. I know that, I remember watching Jose Baez's opening statement where he was going to try to implicate him somehow, but there's a big disconnect that I don't think we know yet between implicating the father in Kaylee's death and implicating this meter reader somehow who found the body. I'm curious to see how Jose Baez is going to make that connection.
Can Jose Baez, in a sense, change the direction of the case based on the witness testimony? Does that happen in terms of exactly where he's steering the jury?
Oh, sure. I mean, if he gets the state, everybody has to think on their feet here. If he puts on a witness or extracts something from a witness that kind of changes what the state was doing at that witness, then you got to be adaptable, and you're going to have to get up there as the state's attorney and redirect that witness and try to steer him back to where you want him, or cover what the defense brought out and get them back to where you want them.
So because
we've seen a lot of that with the expert testimony.
Yeah, exactly, we have. And because the defense doesn't have to prove anything, do you think, Keith, that the defense's side of this case will be a lot shorter than the prosecution side? I believe we're a little more than halfway through on the prosecution side. What about the defense? Where will they go?
It usually is. I'm sure Jose Baez, and we had the Fry hearings 2 months ago, I'm sure you're going to see a lot of the same witnesses from the Fry hearings comes back in to refute Dr. Voss's testimony, to try to cast some doubt on the cadaver sniffing dogs. So those guys will certainly be back in for the forensics part of it.
What about Casey? Do you think that's the big question? Will we see her on the stand?
That is the big question. Part of me feels like the only way to resolve a lot of these questions is to put her up there. But you put her up there, she's open to cross-examination by the state, and I think that's going to be a disaster for the defense. And it may be better for them to kind of leave those questions out there. And again, as you say, they don't have to prove anything. It's the state's burden of proof. Leave some of those things in doubt for the jury, and maybe that's enough to kind of cloud things, that the jury will come back with a different verdict than the capital crime.
What did you think, Keith, as a defense attorney, of the opening statements, especially the defense and where they were going? And do you think they'll come out and ask George Anthony, did you molest your daughter? Will they come out and ask, or are they just implying it, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I didn't get to watch all of the opening statements. I saw a few bits and pieces, and I've read up on them. I mean, certainly Baez has thrown a couple of hand grenades out there. He's thrown out implicating the father. He's thrown out this child abuse claim. He's thrown out Roy Kronk as being somewhat suspicious. He's got to follow up on that stuff now, and if he doesn't somehow, the jury's going to pick up on that, and they're going to wonder why he put that stuff out there and then didn't follow up when he was putting on his case.
Keith, thank you so much. There's so many facets to this trial. We're certainly going to use your expertise again. Appreciate it. Welcome back. This is week 3 of testimony in the Casey Anthony trial. We are hearing about how Caylee Anthony's remains were found. Right now, Jennifer Walsh is on the stand. She is a crime scene investigator who arrived at the scene shortly after those remains were found. We also heard a 911 call about the remains and how a skull was found. It turned out to be Caylee Anthony's skull. And we also heard testimony from the deputy who went into the woods where Caylee's remains were found. And we heard from Lee Anthony this morning. He was on the stand only for a short time, Casey Anthony's brother. He said that Casey told him that Zanny the nanny held her down and took Caylee, even saying you're an unfit mother. Criminal defense attorney Keith Murray is helping us out here, going through all the facets of this case. Keith, let's talk about how the prosecution is doing in terms of building a story, telling the story of how they believe Casey Anthony murdered her daughter, Caylee.
Sure. I mean, the prosecution in this case, as most are in cases like this, are being very methodical. They're doing, in this case, their methodology is a timeline approach. They're starting off with before Caylee is supposed to have disappeared. They're going into Casey's life before then, bringing us up through that time period, and now we're at the point where the body's found, and they're bringing on all these investigators. First we had the forensic stuff from earlier in the week with finding the car and the trash in the car and the cadaver dogs and the scent and all the investigation that surrounded while she was missing before the body was found. And now chronologically we've gotten to the point where we found the body in the woods. So now you're going to have the crime scene technicians. Right now they've got, I believe, a forensic photographer up there who's talking about taking establishing shots of the crime scene and moving in. I think next you're probably going to hear from, at least in the next few witnesses, you're certainly going to hear from the medical examiner, and I believe the state is putting on an expert witness who will testify as to root growth as a determination of how long the remains have been in the woods.
Yeah, as you're saying that, Keith, I'm keeping my eye on what's going on inside the courtroom right now, and they are showing pictures of the wooded area and circling exactly where the remains were found. So, Keith, it seems like they're not leaving anything out. They're storytelling, and they're building blocks to tell us, the viewers, especially the jury, what happened. Do they have to explain why this happened, the motive, or they just have to say, look, this woman killed her daughter and lied about it?
No, typically you don't have to explain motive. I think at one point it used to be, and I think rulings over the years have kind of led that astray. I mean, it certainly helps to have a motive. If you can establish a motive and say why it was done, that's great. It adds to your case. And I think the state did some of that earlier, showing her partying attitude, the lifestyle she had, how her daughter may have been holding her back from doing the things that she wanted. But then Baez was quick to say, well, her parents were kind of doing the same thing to her. Why didn't she kill her parents too? And I can't remember what witness that was, but I remember that exchange taking place.
Keith, we just have about a minute left before I have to go to break. But I think what was very damaging were those jailhouse telephone calls with her parents, and the jury saw and heard her lying firsthand. It's one thing to hear it through Lee, her brother or family member. It's another thing to hear the lies through her.
Yeah, the only thing I can think is that somehow she actually, these lies are so intricate and so vivid. That's what's astonishing to me, and I wouldn't be surprised if she actually believed them somehow. I mean, she's a tremendously good liar, or in her mind, somehow this stuff is true. And the only way we're going to find that out is if they put her on the stand.
It seems like she is pathological. Keith, got to go to break. We'll be right back. Stay put.